We need to talk about reparations. In 2015, British taxpayers made their final payment on a debt to compensate slave owners for the loss of their property when slavery was abolished. The people whose ancestors were enslaved got nothing. In 2026, when the UN finally voted to recognize the Transatlantic Slave Trade as a crime against humanity, 3 countries voted against: the USA, Israel, and Argentina. More than 50 others, mostly from Europe, abstained. The transatlantic slave trade, one of the worst horrors in human history, was at the heart of the global economy for centuries. So what happens when the global system gets presented with an invoice for its dark past? Broadcast commencing in. In March 2026, we witnessed a masterclass of global South diplomacy at the UN. For years, African countries have been pushing to have the transatlantic slave trade be recognized as a crime against humanity. A long campaign of lobbying across the international system, largely supported by countries in Latin America and in Asia. Last year, at the Commonwealth meeting of heads of government, African countries successfully pushed forward a motion, despite opposition from the UK, to recognize slavery as a global crime against humanity. Not long after, the African Union reinforced that decision at the regional level. Then, Ghana raised the resolution at the UN General Assembly. And it was a resounding success. 123 countries around the world voted yes, and with no veto in the General Assembly, there was no way to stop such a popularly backed resolution. If you know much about the transatlantic slave trade, it's hard to see why anyone would vote against the resolution. The transatlantic slave trade flourished for more than 350 years, carrying at least 12.5 million Africans across the ocean. Disease and starvation led to an estimated 2 million dead during the voyages. Another 2 to 4 million died being marched to coasts. And when they arrived, they faced horrors, endless labor, confinement, and dehumanization across generations. At least 3 million dead in seasoning camps before being purchased. Countless more killed by slave owners on plantations or for standing up. But the reality is worse than history could possibly record. There is no complete, comprehensive database of all slaving voyages, and even after abolition, illegal enslavement and transportation of Africans continued for at least a century. Some estimates suggest that up to 40% of Africans died before reaching the New World, with some scholars arguing that equates to 60 million deaths. For Africa, slavery was catastrophic. The continent was systematically stripped of its most valuable resource, its people. Forced economic underdevelopment, demographic pressures, racial hierarchies, challenges that would only be compounded by decades of colonialism. So with such staggering numbers, how could anybody vote against recognizing this as a crime against humanity? The US, Israel, and Argentina voted no, but they weren't completely alone in their opposition. 52 countries chose to abstain from the vote, including the UK, Canada, and most of Europe. Their defense? They claimed that it would be wrong to rank tragedies, and that argument sounds reasonable, but doesn't stand to scrutiny when you look a little closer. Slavery was not considered a crime against humanity before this vote. By not recognizing the transatlantic slave trade for centuries, while recognizing other crimes against humanity, we were already ranking them. We were saying that some genocides were historical anomalies worthy of our attention, while the centuries-long industrialization of African misery was just business as usual. Previous attempts to condemn the transatlantic slave trade were met with the disclaimer, it was legal at the time, as if legality should be the basis of crimes against humanity, rather than morality and principle. No. For many of these countries, the real issue wasn't the ranking of tragedies or the legality, it was fears over liability. In other words, reparations. how do you begin to quantify reparations for a crime of such scale? Is it even possible? Well, Haiti was forced to pay France for its own freedom to the tune of $20 to $30 billion. The UK only finished paying off £25 billion of debt it used to compensate slave owners in 2015. So we've quantified costs like this before, just in the wrong direction. We know exactly how to move money when it's for the oppressors. The vote at the UN raised a question the West has been avoiding for centuries. Who actually owes who? But the resolution doesn't set out a specific dollar amount for reparations. It commits to exploring a process for global reparations. It calls for justice for victims, skills and education programs, debt cancellation for African countries, and for the return of cultural artifacts being housed in Western museums and galleries. It demands recognition that much of the world order is built on dark foundations. We need to address the imbalance once and for all. The resolution is specific about what it's asking for, a formal process of reparations. But what would that actually look like? This is just my personal opinion, but a Marshall Plan for Africa is long overdue. The Marshall Plan was an economic reconstruction plan for post-World War II Europe. Imagine something similar for Africa, a global initiative internationally funded, led by Africans to facilitate sustainable economic growth, strengthen infrastructure, and boost development outcomes across the continent. Not only would this be good for Africa, it could also end up being a net positive for the entire world, reducing global insecurity, irregular migration flows, and resource conflicts. And the truth is, because slavery and colonialism have always hidden under the pretext of being legal at the time, no serious consideration has been given to redressing these issues. It's time. It's time we took this seriously. It's time we stopped hiding behind legalese. It's time for the world to seriously address the consequences of slavery and colonialism. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe for more videos on geopolitical power, ideology, and changing the world.